Welcome to the Frictionless Innkeeper podcast. Coming right up, fresh tips and insights from lodging professionals aimed at helping you improve your business. Our podcast is brought to you by the Frictionless Guest App, which helps improve your guest stay without adding more to your day. Learn how at frictionlessguest.com. All right, Steve, how you doing today?
Good, Matt. How's it going?
Doing well. So our podcast coming up right now is with Eben Viens, who's the owner at the B&B team, and talks about some very interesting stuff, a lot of big time trends that are happening and some changes in the hospitality B&B marketplace.
Yeah, his company they do brokering. He talks a little bit about investment trends and that sort of thing. But more importantly, I think, and more insightfully for listeners, he talks about just some newer innkeepers. He obviously has a lot of exposure to that, getting new innkeepers in to purchase properties. And so he talks about some of the cool ideas that they've had, some of the newer people coming in, the younger blood, if you want to call it, coming into it. And I think it's pretty cool. A lot of good ideas that our listeners might be able to leverage at their properties, and trying to differentiate what they do and make themselves more of an option than the bland old hotels that are out there, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's a perfect segue right there into our podcast. And we hope you enjoy this Frictionless Innkeeper interview with Eben Viens, who is the owner at the B&B team. And Eben and Steve, how you both doing today?
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Excellent. Yeah, great to have you, Eben. Steve, how are you doing today?
I'm hanging in there, Matt, as usual. Thanks for asking. Not that you really care, but no, thanks for asking. Eben, thanks a lot for joining us. We appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's great to be here.
Yeah, this is great, guys. Yeah, let's go ahead and kick it off. And Eben, tell us about the B&B team, new direction, background, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so I am the owner of the B&B team, which is really now a combination of two companies. One is innPartners, which started way back in, the 1980s, early 80s as Oates and Bredfeldt. My grandparents, in fact, Bill Oates, who was considered the innkeeping guru for many years, and Heide Bredfeldt, who was a psychologist by trade and really focused on the personal side of innkeeping that I think is still overlooked so much, in speaking to people coming into our market. So they started a company called innPartners, Oates and Bredfeldt, which over time developed into innPartners. And I purchased the B&B team, a competitive group, at the end of 2020. And in doing so, I've kind of brought together the two national innkeeping kind of consulting brokerage companies. And we're in the process now of really bringing them together on a marketing sort of larger basis. But there's a lot happening in our world. I think speaking to anyone in our shoes doing the consulting work, kind of brokerage work, clearly there's an active market out there for real estate, and that has driven our market to some degree. It's also created some interference, I think, at the same time. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But personally, I grew up in the innkeeping business. So obviously under the wings of both Heide and Bill, my family purchased a 15-room full-service inn in Jamaica, Vermont, near Stratton Ski Resort a number of years ago. And they owned and operated it. And actually, my uncle David Heiler was brought in from his work as a general manager of Hard Rock Cafes in San Francisco and beyond to be the innkeeper. And I think it's an interesting case study because, Bill was an owner in sort of a hands-off, respect. He would call up and shout at David and Heide both for all the over expense on food cost, labor cost. And Heide would show up early in the morning, with freshly cut flowers, and she'd be there really creating the guest experience and, focusing on quality, which for anyone who knows Heide, that's always been her charge is quality in all things and charging for that experience. And then David, I think I learned a lot from him as well, because as the innkeeper between these two forces really had to take, the idealism that maybe Heide brought to the table and the realism of Bill's approach and the numbers, and was the balancing act between them. So I think that the irony here is that there's three people in this scenario. I think whether you're a single innkeeper or a couple or a non-couple partnership in this industry, you have those same competing voices, in your head all the time, the focus on the financial side of the business, the personal side of the business. And of course, always trying to create an experience and, service your guests on a very personal level. And I think it was, Phil Jenkins, who was very active in our industry for many years, who talked a lot about the balance between high tech and high touch. That's really the charge of any innkeeper, is focusing on your marketing and the sort of back of house office responsibilities and requirements, but then very quickly shifting and going, front of house to working with your guests and being available to your guests in all, in every respect. So that was the experience. Sort of, I was behind the scenes as a fairly young lad, kind of watching this all play out, learning the business, and then came up beside Bill and really learned from Bill hands-on, doing valuations and other consulting work, for innkeepers in the industry. So that's my background. And today, really, we're working, again, like so many consultants, brokers in our field, helping people, to buy and sell and really fundamentally understand what this business is all about. Like I said, I think the personal side is such a critical conversation to have. And we actually go into our aspiring innkeeper seminars and even just conversations with aspiring innkeepers, trying to convince them not to get into this industry. Because I think if you have the right skill sets, if you have the right expectations about, what the financial reward will be, you can be very successful. But I think it's setting those expectations early on that's so important, because people get into this world and they think they're going to get rich running a 5-room inn or even a 10-room inn. And that's just really not the reality. Of course, it's a case by case, study, but really there's a financial reward you get at the end of the experience of running an inn. And that's sort of a forced savings, when you sell, hopefully having bought in a market that, where real property appreciates and you're driving the experience and you're commanding higher rates over time to sell that experience and increase the business value. That's the ideal sort of world scenario. So it's always a conversation we have with clients, and it's about understanding where they are in the life cycle, if they really should be getting into the business, or if they are in the business, when they should think about getting out potentially and planning effectively to make that a successful and timely transfer. So that's sort of the background, and there's a lot happening right now in the industry. If you talk to anyone, I know innkeepers or other industry professionals, people, doing the marketing for inns, innkeepers, small boutique properties. It's just, I think the pandemic world that we have lived in over the last, 2 or so years has driven this market of guests to inns, to B&Bs, because they are small, they are safe, they are incredibly marketable. So there's been a surge of activity in our world, a lot of young people who have been introduced to the innkeeping concept, who I think beforehand were really focused on more short-term vacation rental models and other alternative forms of hospitality. And I think many of them had a great experience from what we're hearing from innkeepers and conversations I've had with guests at inns. And I think we'll return to inns and become another part of every inn's repeat clientele. I think from a pure sort of brokerage perspective or kind of sales perspective, at the same time, we've seen a huge interest on the part of investor type buyers in our market. And there's this ongoing conversation and even a keyword that I hear thrown around a lot, which is fragmentation. I think a lot of people look at our market as being sort of fractured, fragmented, because it is, a collection of however many thousand small businesses run by small business owners. There is obviously a collective spirit and collective organizations that bring us all together on state levels, local levels, national levels. But I think a lot of people are looking at the market, looking at the appeal of a smaller in business. And I think from a private equity perspective, trying to find ways of analyzing and then, seeking a return on investment on these smaller purchases. And even the idea of buying, 3, 4, 5 small inns or B&Bs to create a small collection in one market versus buying one standard style hotel or motel where every guest room is, 150 square feet with the same standard style bathrooms and the same product you're selling to those guests. So I think it's a good industry to be in if you're here, our segment of hospitality, and there's a lot of growth and development happening. And we look at it as, interference to some degree when we talk about this idea of investor interest in the market. But I think at the same time, there's an evolution that's always been happening in our world. We look at the rise of short-term vacation rentals in the same way that, TripAdvisor came on the scene and that peer-to-peer review system kind of created this controversy early on. It's something that we're going to learn from. The industry will shift, it will change. and we'll see where it takes us in the end.
Yeah, and the main purpose of the B&B team is brokering, right? I mean, that's your core business, right? Is
Yeah.
buying and selling of properties, right? So I guess you see it from all of the sides. I mean, you work with investors as well as people that want to own and run the inns and all of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think generally speaking, if your money is green, we're willing to have a conversation. But it is nice to see. I mean, our industry has been driven so much by, so-called corporate refugees, people coming out of the corporate world, fleeing cities. And there's something really rewarding to my mind about working with people who are getting into the business for, at least 50% of the reason is very personally driven. It's a lifestyle they're seeking outside of that, very profit driven kind of corporate world that so many people inhabit. So there's really something rewarding. I mean, I've worked with clients leaving San Francisco with very young families, kind of leaving that sprawl, who found their way to Whitefish, Montana, to a 9-room bed and breakfast. And and I think they're benefiting with a young family in particular from being in that environment and also looking at ways of growing the business in that market. But, all of us in consultants, working all over the country have these same stories. But it is interesting. I think that the question of investor buyers, they've existed for many years. There are actually some, good friends of ours in this industry who have built fairly large collections of, 20, 30 plus inns. And really, when I say inn, I'm not talking about an average room size of 20 to 30. They're probably on average 10 to 12 room properties. But I think it wasn't the norm historically. And I think the interest we're seeing, it's definitely new, to our industry. So,
well, the other good thing about things evolving constantly and talking about what's new is you've seen, like you said, you've seen younger couples kind of coming into things, right? So
yeah.
So there's been, with that comes new ideas and thoughts on how to do things differently, or just not that anybody's trying to shake up the old order and create a new one, but that's just naturally going to happen because people are coming from different perspectives, age or otherwise, and they're saying, well, why don't we try doing this or doing that? Talk about some of what you see and some of the cool ideas and that sort of thing that you're starting to see out there.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I think it's funny because in speaking with kind of prospective innkeepers and even some new inn owners, there's obviously kind of a demographic shift that's always occurring. People are leaving the industry, others are coming in. The age range, I mean, of course, there have always been these younger buyers supported by family members or coming into the market sort of in and of themselves. But there's a lot of energy continually kind of feeding our market. And one of the things as a general rule, I would say, is that there is this heightened sense that people coming into the market want to bring more of their professional background and more of that focus into their properties. As I mentioned, I mean, so many innkeepers come from pretty diverse and extensive professional careers. I mean, there are people like Rick and Bev Davis at Captain Lord Mansion who were, some of the most incredible driven innkeepers. And I believe it was Bev who had a marketing background with McDonald's on a very kind of executive level for many years. And she brought that to the inn and constantly driving the business forward. So I think that idea of bringing professionalism more rather than leaving your career behind, you're bringing that, your passions, your interests into your property, but also looking at a market that, is increasingly that there's a need for more of a clean kind of contemporary approach to marketing your property. The world of the old fusty Victorian B&B is behind us. I think it's been behind us for many, many years. I mean, you can still have a couple of commemorative doilies hanging by your door as a nod to the past, which is great. But the idea of holding on to everything Victorian is just not where we are today. So I think when we talk about beyond that question of professionalism, the ideas that innkeepers are bringing to the table, it's really about selling an experience and not only that, but, an authentic, very shareable in the coin sort of not coin, but use a younger person's vocabulary. It's the idea of these Instagrammable experiences that you're creating on site, that you're creating in your market, that you're connecting your guests to in all things. So I think there's a lot of examples we can give. I know we had talked about, for instance, the Landmark Inn in Cooperstown, New York. The owners there came from New York City. One of them had a background in PR, working for some large corporations. And the other was a designer who did a lot of, design for boutique shops and pop-ups throughout the city. And, the first thing that they did when they landed in their inn is they asked me a question, which was, are we a B&B or are we an inn? And I think it was getting to the heart of that idea of, what is the association and the connotation of a B&B, a bed and breakfast in the classic sense versus an inn. And after a couple of, minutes of talk, we realized that very clearly the inn model, or at least that sort of terminology, has a lot less baggage than the B&B concept. And of course, when people come to our seminars, they always ask us, well, what's the difference between a bed and breakfast and an inn? It's a matter of semantics, or marketing really, because you have bed and breakfast properties that call themselves bed and breakfast that have incredible, 5-course dining operations with full service restaurants. And you also have places that call themselves inns that are at their core, just a bed and a breakfast. So I think, the owners here came in and they determined, okay, we are an inn, we will remain an inn, and we're going to lean into that kind of clean contemporary aesthetic in the same way that you're finding all of these boutique hotel companies that are developing, what they're calling inns up in the Hudson Valley, the Adirondacks. It's very much, that term and that concept is very much in vogue. So the first thing they did is that the Landmark Inn had this logo that was, designed by the daughter of the previous owners. It was kind of this looping L, Landmark Inn. And they found some old, marketing documentation in a drawer hidden somewhere with a very old style, typeface that just said the Landmark Inn. And it was the most contemporary, clean design. And so the first thing they did was that became their logo. They reached about 30 years back in, history and brought that forward. And it's this incredibly clean aesthetic. And that, I think, kind of has driven their decisions at the property. Other things that they've thought about, and these are things that innkeepers have done, successful innkeepers for many years, they created an artist residency program. And the idea behind that is that they are bringing in once a month, they're offering a 2 to 3 night stay to artists. You can apply to this program. And the idea is bringing people from other markets into Cooperstown to learn about the market, to experience the inn, and to connect them with other creators and artisans in that market to kind of create further development in their field and beyond. And I think it's amazing to think about the connections that they forged. The first person who came to the inn was a candle maker from Brooklyn. And so she came, she stayed on site. There's no, expectation about any kind of collaborative efforts moving forward. But she said within about a day of being there, this is such an amazing experience. I want to make you a signature scent for your property. And so the innkeeper said, of course, that sounds amazing. So she made the signature scent. And of course, Cooperstown, New York is home to the Baseball Hall of Fame and a number of other incredible museums, the Glimmerglass Opera Festival. So I think that the base scent in this Landmark Inn fragrance is the leather of the baseball glove.
That's what I was going to guess. I was wondering, I was going to joke about that.
I know.
I was also going to make a joke about they had the artists or artisans come to feed them because they were probably starving artists,
And that's also
breakfast, but yeah.
I'm sure many of them have not eaten as well as they do when they reach the inn. So really they sort of care for them, but I think they love the scent so much that this candle maker created that they actually now have a collaborative relationship where they have these signature scents being created in the form of the candles, and they sell them in their gift shop and they light them in all their common spaces. So this is not a new concept. I mean, if you talk to boutique, hoteliers, people in the boutique hotel world, they are looking at, trying to sensorialize every possible thing to create these memories and experiences on site that are going to, first of all, create memories for the guests and then find ways of reconnecting them to the property. I think a great example of this in another form is a property called Garth Woodside Mansion, and one of the former owners who passed away somewhat recently, Julie Ralston, used to have these old 1980s style hot plates. And on the hot plates, in the breakfast area, were all of their ceramic mugs. And I think we've all seen, this style ceramic mug at every inn that we've been to. But this is the first time, my experience at the inn that I picked up a mug on my way to breakfast for my coffee, and the mug was warm in my hand. And I think that idea of kind of creating that relationship, that kind of embodied experience of hospitality, in the same way that you smell a candle when you first walk in or you hear music playing, you're connecting to that property in a way and creating these opportunities for connection and the creation of memories that is just has so much power. And I think one of the other great examples of that is the power of food. And if you think about where memory is created and stored actually in our brains, the same area where we kind of sense and taste is kind of right up against the area of our brain where memory is created. So I think food is one of these areas when we talk about a bed and breakfast that innkeepers sort of sell themselves short on. It's half of what you have to offer your guests. And if you don't have beautiful photographs of your food on your website and in your social media marketing, you're really losing the battle. And I think the innkeepers who find ways, and of course, food is difficult to photograph. That's one part of the equation. But there are so many innkeepers who have these signature dishes that they offer and these amazing experiences based around food. And they're just not getting that word out. And again, from a competitive perspective, you think about how many short-term vacation rentals there are in your market, how many hotels there are that are serving, processed eggs, whatever it is. That is a point of differentiation that really no one else has. So really lean into that, I would say, as a general thought for innkeepers. An example of that, I'm just coming back, I mentioned, from a trip, in a 7-day trip that took me from Albuquerque to Santa Fe to Taos to Farmington, New Mexico, up into the Durango, Colorado area, back to Santa Fe for a night, and then I flew to Wisconsin for a couple of days before I came home. And one of the inns that I stayed at is called Casa Culinaria. It's formerly known as Don Gaspar in downtown Santa Fe. And it's sort of calls itself the Gourmet Inn, and for a reason. I think the owners, one of them is a sommelier, and the other is a chef who was trained at Le Cordon Bleu. And so they offer a tasting breakfast every morning in 3 seatings to their guests. And they have a 12-room inn. So it's an experience, and it requires a lot of work and effort on their part. But it has become such a draw for that property that guests will book just because of the breakfast. And of course, you're in Santa Fe, so there's so many other opportunities to eat good food, which is, of course, what drove them to the market in the first place, and is also what's continually driving guests to that market. There was an innkeeper, we had an experience at an inn many, many years ago where we had an incredible, what seemed to be a tasting menu at breakfast. And we went and talked to the chef afterwards, or the cook in this case, and asked them, what inspired you to create this incredible, multi-course, sensorial experience. And the comment that was made was that there are guests here spending $500 a night on a room. I think they deserve a $500 breakfast to go along with that room. And again, I think when we talk about points of differentiation, inns have always been, in relation or contrast to hotels, we have driven rates versus driving occupancy. You can stay in the same hotel, same room at the same hotel in the off season and pay $99. And then in the height of summer, pay $400 for that same night. And there's nothing you're going to get that's special or, directed or personalized in that experience. It's the same room. It's the same bed, very different staff, I'm sure, depending on what time you land at the property. So I think there's such an opportunity in really looking at these experiences and food-driven experiences in particular, because we're all doing that. We all prepare breakfasts at our inns. We all think about food more than anything else because we're always running out to get, when the fruit starts to rot, you're out at the grocery store preparing your next day's meal. So that, I think, is a really good example. And to kind of talk about the rate question is, when I landed first in Santa Fe, I realized very quickly that I had made a mistake in my travel plans and I was without a room for my first night in the state. And so I looked around at every property and every single bed and breakfast was sold out for that night, Wednesday. And of course, it was Texas spring break, so there was a lot of activity happening in the state. But even so, every bed and breakfast was sold out. Of course, the Relais and Chateau property nearby was also sold out. There was one hotel in town, which was the big generic kind of seemingly boutique, but just a pretty standard style hotel. And I ended up paying, $450 for a one night stay at a hotel. Every inn had sold out at about a $200 or so night rate. And I was stuck paying, more than twice that rate for an experience that really wasn't an experience at all. That was a bed, a clean room, fairly friendly staff at the front desk. And that was it. And so, I know that Santa Fe, for instance, is, I think, one of the second most, active markets in New Mexico. people, you wouldn't know this, but Farmington actually has the highest occupancy, for the state because of all of the business activity that's tied to that market. But Santa Fe has about an average occupancy of about 70% year over year. And I think there's this general idea that we always say, if your occupancy exceeds 70% at an inn, you're simply not charging enough for the experience. You're not charging enough for what it is you have to offer. So I know that a lot of the inns in Santa Fe right now are running occupancy well in excess of 70%. And I would say to them, you're not charging enough. That $200, room night, which includes this beautiful 5-course tasting menu, probably should be a $300 a night room when people are clearly paying more at much less quality properties that are selling much less experience, just around the corner.
Yeah, sounds like it based upon that experience, that particular anecdotal thing,
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll be going there in another month or two. Actually, I'll be in Santa Fe. So looking forward to that. It's a cool town.
It's a really cool town. And I think, you look at what people are willing to pay for food related experience. Of course, food drives travel in today's market more than anything. And the joke that I've made since that occurred, that, $450 a night stay, there was the Relais Chateau property up the street. And when you're already paying that much money for a very standard style experience, I was more willing to sort of reach a little higher to have a greater experience than I was to sort of settle for something less. So again, I think innkeepers, and that was my experience throughout the state and up in Colorado, that innkeepers were not charging enough for the experience. And of course, in pandemic times, there's been this pent up demand for travel. And we've seen some innkeepers, double or even triple their rates, to levels that are just not sustainable. Right, and still they're getting those rates today. And we'll see when that might fall off or not. But I think there's a lot of space that innkeepers don't realize is there in a market that increasingly has consumers who are totally price insensitive. That concept of price elasticity really needs to come into conversation, I think, a lot more often in our world.
Yeah, interesting. So now talking about like the Landmark Inn, the Cooperstown property, and kind of the artist thing, for example, what about have you seen any other interesting ideas? Like, we're all about kind of we meaning, our app is all about kind of the communal local approach and pulling in local experiences that are unique. It's one thing to, partner with artists or artisans, from close by or whatever. So have you seen anything interesting recently in terms of partnerships with off-property things to do? And are innkeepers leveraging, does it look like they're trying to leverage that more now, trying to get, again, partnering with other local businesses that are unique and kind of cool to get, since, like you say, the property can control, the breakfast is 50% of it and the stay or the place is the other 50, I guess. But probably more than 50% of the guests' time is probably off property, right? Yeah. So have you seen any interesting ideas out there on that stuff?
Yeah, there's so many great examples. And I think one that's still kind of art related that I love is when my family had our inn, my grandmother, Haida, connected with an art gallery up the street, that was full of all these New York based artists who had, large sprawling estates in Vermont, where they would come for the summer and work on their pottery or whatever it was. And so she connected with the gallery, and all of the common spaces had all of the artwork from this local gallery. And so that the inn effectively became a satellite gallery of this incredible gallery where pieces were selling from, anywhere from $500 to tens of thousands of dollars. Another art related example I have to mention is that there's an artist in our hometown of Brattleboro, Vermont, who's a ceramic artist named Stephen Proctor. And he connected actually innkeepers at the Inn on Putney Road in downtown, connected with Stephen. And he has brought these large vessels that sell from anywhere from, $10,000 to $40,000, and made the grounds and the interior spaces of the inn a living showroom for his pieces. So guests are coming, they're staying, they're seeing these beautiful art pieces. Some of them are going to the gallery and connecting with the artist directly. I think those are great examples of, people want to have these authentic experiences. They want to feel connected to the community and understand the context of that community. And art is an incredible way to bring people in and make them feel like the experiences. It's more than walking into an inn in Brattleboro in this kind of idyllic village setting, and you've got photos of the Eiffel Tower up on the wall. There's some kind of disconnect there that I think can be pretty fatal to
Right. Yeah, it's a good point. What about, because you're talking about the food focus,
Yeah.
Sourcing of local stuff, or maybe because that can be seasonal, which would certainly be a challenge in Vermont or other places as well.
Yeah.
But brands, like there are local brands that if I come to Vermont, I don't know what the local brands are because I'm from Baltimore,
Yeah.
So, but I know the local brands here, but most people don't know them. So, yeah, I mean, have you seen any of that where where innkeepers will kind of the local type stuff, could be statewide, but traditional brands that have been around that the locals know about, that are good because they're still around.
Yeah. And I think it's a missed opportunity for a lot of innkeepers because you might offer, say, a charcuterie board that's a part of a popular package, and still you're leaving off the award-winning cheese that's made, a town away in Putney, Vermont, and you're leaving off, when people want to do some kind of a bed and brew package where they're getting, a 4-pack of 16-ounce craft beer with their stay, you're not reaching, I think, within that market, on a level that would have significant value to you. And consumers care. I mean, I think the idea of local, 5 years ago even was hundreds of miles. Today, when we talk about, local, we're talking about tens of miles, if that. And when you look at a market like Vermont, of course, the question of seasonality, when you're talking about having seasonal food offerings, can be a struggle. And of course, food costs are harder to control when you're kind of reaching on one level. But on another level, these things can be even more reachable and less expensive depending on the time of year. And I think has such value. I mean, you're charging in our world. When you look at things like packages and gift shop items, not so much, but the package question, you're passing a service and experience on to your guests, typically without much profit. You're offering something to them. You're connecting to the community. I know at my family's inn, it was, Stratton Ski Resort. It was about buying lift tickets and really just passing them to the guests so that they could be the first person on the mountain. They could, skip all the lines of people waiting to buy their tickets and, actually have that experience of being the first person on the mountain for the fresh powder. So I think it's critical. And if you look at a lot of these boutique properties out there, if you look at, all the Instagram influencers out in the world who actually are worth their salt, they are so hyper focused on local products, local services, connecting with the most authentic, this or that in each community. And as an innkeeper, you are an organic concierge. You are there because you love that market, we would hope. You bought into that market because you care about being connected to the community. So you should be able to lean into that passion and that love for the community and really market it in a way that is going to impact your bottom line in a very positive way. And again, it's about building the rates. If you're selling the experience, you're selling the services, people will choose to stay with you because no one else is doing this.
Yeah, and it's kind of a three-legged stool, at least the way I view things. You've got the innkeeper, you've got the guest, and then you've got the local businesses. And they all benefit if you can bring them together. But I think it's up to the innkeeper to do that. They've got to establish those relationships with the local businesses. And the guests certainly aren't going to know any better unless the innkeepers are, setting those relationships up and communicating, hey, here's an experience.
Yeah.
Like you say, whether they're charging or really making much or not from that, I think, and I think it's super, I guess it depends on the area and what the impact has been with COVID. I think regardless of that, there's, this importance, I think, to people aren't going to come stay with you unless it's just your property is the draw, which is not often the case, right? If you're not a destination kind of property, then you need those local experiences for the people to want to come there. It's, it works both ways. It's really important, I think.
Absolutely. And I know an example at the ALP conference, the Select Registry track, Bashar Wali was talking about one of his hotels in, I believe it was in New York City. When COVID was kind of at its peak, they connected with a very well-known, very sort of trendy, hip ice cream maker in Brooklyn or something. And so what they were offering was this experience where you could come to the inn, you would get a pint of this ice cream in your freezer at the hotel. And again, it was saying, you don't have to go out into this pandemic, crazed world come
experience the local thing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Experience it within the context and, in the safety of your own room, cocooning in that space. And that's something I think we talk about, creating a space, the guest room within your larger inn, which should have comfortable common areas within the context of its larger community. And you should try to make every level, every layer of that sort of onion of your community as comfortable, as, marketable to the guests. And I know, it was so many years ago that I think it was Pi was talking about creating spa-like experiences in bathrooms. And in today's world, especially, we saw a lot of innkeepers, the property in Placerville, California, that Edenvale Inn, that focused so much on creating these cocooning experiences where literally the guests would come in, and it's everything from the quality of the linens on the bed to having two comfortable, beautiful sort of upholstered chairs in the rooms. That's something I still go into inns that are, driven by double occupancy, and there's only one kind of rickety chair in the corner for a guest to sit in. And especially when guests are sitting and they're eating more in their rooms and you're offering that option and you're charging for it, you need those spaces to be comfortable and functional. I think going back to the Casa Culinaria, I spent, I stayed in about 7 properties over the last week. That was my last in the Southwest before I flew to the Midwest. And they had these beautiful Egyptian cotton sheets on the bed. And when I hit that bed to sleep, that embodied experience of feeling that pure cotton was, I had this incredible reaction to it, which was to say, this is a luxury. This is something that, again, you're charging $200 a night. You're giving me this amazing food experience. You're giving me these really upscale sheets. That, I think, should be more of that 300 plus a night experience. And so these things are all related, but the idea of cocooning, again, is something that's it's been a conversation point in our industry for so long. And people need to think about it more. How are people interacting with that, with the room, with the fabrics you're using? When we talk about even the idea of sustainability, I mean, guests are related and they choose their, decisions. Consumers choose to make decisions based upon political preferences and all these other things in today's world. I mean, there are lifestyle brands that we align ourselves with because they in some way reflect our needs and our passions and our own way of thinking. And on a sustainability level, I've seen a lot of innkeepers who have moved to having, better quality furnishings with, organic materials, organic beds in the guest rooms. And you market that because people will stay with you if those are your practices versus staying at any, flagged hotel where really those things are afterthoughts, or they go in the other direction because it's about cost savings and profit versus people.
Cool. Matt, am I going too far afield here? Or
no, not at all. No,
I think it would be good to maybe try to finish up talking about trends. I mean, you've talked about, Eben, a lot of kind of trends or some specific ideas and all of that. With some of the newer innkeepers that you've worked with, and plus you're the world traveler, or at least the continental traveler or whatever, U.S. traveler, quite a bit.
Yeah.
So you see it hands-on. Yeah. Thoughts about where things might be heading in the near future? I mean, obviously you talked about investment, the investment folks that's a dynamic. And I think there's also been some inns and B&Bs that have probably been purchased and turned into private residences. That's, always, I guess, a concern, I would say. But more so, I guess, about whether it's guest experience or that sort of thing. Where do you see things going? Where's the industry heading?
Yeah, well, I think as you pointed out, because of the lack of supply in residential real estate markets, just because there's been such a red hot real estate market, no matter where you are, we have seen, some conversion of smaller B&Bs and inns into homes or family compounds. And I think, that cuts two ways because there are also a lot of innkeepers who attach an emotional element in some form to their idea of what their property is worth. And so there are a lot of inns that are really clearly inns and B&Bs that don't have that alternate use value, that are out in the market, priced, I think, well above where they should be as a business. And we hope that those innkeepers get those, high prices if they can after, years of work in the industry. So we're seeing that, really a lack of current supply in the market and a huge number of buyers. I know in speaking to all of my, affiliates, partners, other consultants, brokers in the industry, there's a line of buyers that's going out the door, very qualified people looking for a lifestyle change, and just currently not a lot of properties that are at least actively on the market. The idea being that, you can call an innkeeper, you catch them at the right time of the day, and they're ready to sell after a rough breakfast service, whatever it may be. And so I think, we're finding ourselves doing a lot more of that, reach out and starting conversations with owners of properties, just because, of course, we want to get a sense of where they are to make sure that they're in good standing. But I think that's happening a lot more, of these kind of private conversations and deals that are coming to fruition. So we'll see. I mean, I think we're hoping to see more activity, but there's a huge number of buyers, and that's interesting. From I think a kind of conceptual or design perspective, and I mentioned the idea of moving towards sustainability. One really critical thing is that so many people in COVID times, but even outside of COVID times, are looking for more space on site at property. So the idea of kind of bringing the outside in and the inside out. So having more exterior space for your guests to spend time in. There's a property actually I was having conversations with in Joseph, Oregon. They bought this property that had been formerly run as an inn, reopened it as an inn, and then in the process built this amazing kind of complex of outdoor deck space with fires. And it's become this incredible kind of canopied space where you've got trees and aspens, everything around you. But it's an incredible space for guests, especially in a pandemic time, because they can be outside, they can be social and spend time with other guests and enjoy breakfast without all being crammed into one small dining space where everyone's a little bit on edge. So I think in the same piece, bringing the outdoors in, if you're going to be in an interior space, kind of having more organic design elements. I mentioned the idea of having, organic sheets, products, upholstery, even organic color tones and schemes, because people, again, these are to some degree trends, but I think people want very calming, very sort of environments to be in, especially when they're trying to get out of their sort of very corporate 9-to-5 worlds. They go to inns to reconnect with a partner. They go to inns to reconnect with themselves and who they think or know their authentic self to be, who doesn't exist in a house full of kids and, a corporate life that sort of commands everything you do. So giving them that space to kind of be themselves, to connect with themselves, connect with others, I think is what it's all about. I mean, innkeeping is about caring for people. It's about offering them this opportunity to connect with themselves. And I think it's, people, again, are willing to pay for that experience. Inns are not, just a place to sleep. There are, hotels, there are beds on every corner of the US that they could go if that's all they were looking for. Inns are places to have experiences, and they have been that. I didn't mention, but the whole concept of the experience economy was sort of formalized in a book written in 1999 by James Gilmore and Joe Pine. And all the research they did was based on B&Bs in the Midwest. That was their sort of research focus, because of the way that innkeepers offered a very personalized service and kind of a customized service, and that personal relationship that exists between all, innkeepers and their guests. So we are, because of that, clearly, driving the experience economy. Hoteliers, investors want to find ways of capitalizing on that experience economy. I say it's great if we can get, hands-on owner operators in who can enjoy the lifestyle, enjoy the business side of things, and then, when they're ready to sell, do so and get their foot out on good terms. But it's, it's interesting. I mentioned, is it interference or is it evolution, what we're seeing in the market? And I think it's a little bit of both. Progress isn't possible without change, and change is the one constant, right, in our world. So
true. Makes sense. All right. Matt, you got anything else?
No, that's really great. Great stuff here on this podcast today.
Yeah.
And typically at the end, we always ask, is there anything else to add or anything we may have missed before we take it out?
It's because I was writing an email to one of our connected affiliates earlier, and I used this term that I learned from an innkeeper at a property called Mass Farm Inn, years ago, about 10 years ago, when I really started in this industry formally. And he made the comment to me that he, as an innkeeper of this kind of large property, was best of breed, not lame of herd. And that's always sort of stuck with me. I think, again, it's as innkeepers, we all have these conceptions and these ideas of who we are and what we should be charging. And I think we set up these barriers and block ourselves, from really experiencing and offering people something and feeling like we can actually pay for it. So again, you are best of breed, not lame of herd. If you are in an inn or a bed and breakfast, and just throw every notion you have about pricing and what people are looking for out the window based on your experience, and look at everything with really a fresh view as much as you possibly can.
Words of wisdom.
Yeah, for sure.
From a best of breed guy in the innkeeping business.
I hope so. All right. Thank you both so much.
All right.
Good
Thanks,
stuff.
Evan.
Yeah.
All right. Lead us out, Matt. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. What a great way to take us out. So yeah, this concludes this Frictionless Innkeeper podcast interview with Eben Viens, who's the owner at the B&B team. And as you heard, he was kind enough to share his insights on his company's new direction, what's happening in the marketplace, the rise of younger B&B owners, and the shift to the experience economy. And our podcast is brought to you by the Frictionless Guest App, which helps improve your guest stay without adding more to your day. Learn more at frictionlessguest.com. And Eben and Steve, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Evan. We appreciate it.